The Kithrin research vessel Crystal Dawn drifted through the black void of space like a dying firefly. Its once bright bioluminescent hull now flickered weakly, casting pale green light across the damaged sections where the gravity storm had torn through their ship. The beautiful crystalline structure that had taken decades to grow was now cracked and bleeding precious atmosphere into the vacuum. Research Leader Kix's forearms worked desperately across the emergency beacon controls, her normally steady hands shaking with fear and exhaustion. She had been trying to repair their communications array for 18 hours straight, ever since the storm had ripped through their peaceful research mission. The Kithrins were a gentle species, evolved on a world of floating islands and soft breezes. They had never experienced anything like this catastrophic failure in deep space. The emergency beacon was their only hope now. Their main engines were completely dead. Life support was failing sector by sector, and 3 of her crew members were trapped in the lower research bay with no way to reach them. Kixa pushed the transmission power far beyond the safe limits, watching the energy readings climb into dangerous territory. The beacon's crystal core began to glow with an unhealthy purple light, but she didn't care anymore. If they didn't get help soon, they would all die out here in the darkness between. Stars, in her panic and desperation, Kixa made a crucial mistake. Instead of broadcasting on the standard civilian emergency frequency that all peaceful species monitored, she accidentally switched to an ancient military channel. The controls were damaged, and in the poor lighting of the failing ship, she couldn't see the warning symbols clearly. The frequency she chose had been silent for over 300 years, reserved for something called the Deathworld emergency protocols. Most civilized species had forgotten that these protocols even existed. They were created during the dark times, when aggressive species roamed the galaxy and peaceful worlds needed protection from forces they couldn't understand or fight. The protocols were designed to summon help from the most dangerous corners of space, from species that other civilizations preferred to pretend didn't exist, as Kix's desperate message pulsed out into the void. It carried with it the automated military codes that would wake sleeping fleets and alert commanders who had been waiting centuries for such a call. Her simple plea for help became something much more significant when filtered through those ancient emergency systems. Instead of reaching nearby merchant vessels or research stations, her message was being routed through military networks that spanned half the galaxy. The signal traveled faster than light, bouncing between relay stations that most species didn't even know existed. It passed through sectors marked as restricted space, through regions where civilian ships were warned never to venture. With each relay, the message gained priority codes and military encryption that marked it as a genuine crisis requiring immediate response from the most capable forces available. Kixa had no idea what she had just set in motion. She only knew that her crew was dying. She had done everything possible to save them. Science Officer Thyra's hands flew across her data terminal. As the human boarding craft grew larger on their view screen, her normally neat workspace was now scattered with emergency protocol manuals and xenobiology texts, all pulled from the deepest archives of their database. She had never needed to research human contact procedures before because nobody in civilized space ever expected to actually meet one. The first file that appeared on her screen made her blood run cold. It was marked with bright red warning symbols and classified as Extinction Protocol documentation. The text was written in the formal language used for the most serious threats to galactic civilization. According to the records, humans had been officially classified as a Class 10 Deathworld species and banned from most inhabited systems over 2 centuries ago. The more Thyra read, the more terrified she became. Humans, according to these files, came from a planet called Earth, where survival was a daily battle against impossible odds. Their world had killer weather that could freeze or burn anything alive, predatory animals with teeth longer than Kithrin, fingers, and plant life that could poison you just by being in the same room. The planet had tried to kill its inhabitants in every possible way for millions of years, instead of dying out like any sensible species would. The humans had adapted to become even more dangerous than their world. The files described beings who could run for hours without stopping, who could heal from injuries that would kill most other species, and whose reaction time was so fast they could catch objects thrown at them without thinking about it. They had evolved to be perfect survivors on a planet where everything else was a perfect killer. The boarding craft was getting closer now, and through the small porthole windows, Thyra could see shapes moving inside. The research team huddled, together in the center of the bay, as far from the docking ports as possible. Junior researcher Vin was quietly crying, while communications officer Zetra kept muttering prayers to her ancestors. They all knew the stories that were whispered in the outer colonies about what humans did to other species. Some tales claimed that humans kept other beings as slaves, forcing them to fight in gladiator pits for entertainment. Others said they consumed other species as food, preferring their meals to still be alive when they began eating. The most terrifying stories suggested that humans didn't even kill for survival or resources, but simply because they enjoyed the act of conquest itself. Thyra found another file that made her stomach turn. It contained reports from the last known human contact over 300 years ago. An entire Galactic Council research fleet had vanished after investigating human space. The only evidence ever found was a single message pod containing footage of human warriors moving through the ships with weapons that seemed to bend physics itself. The boarding craft attached to their hull with a heavy clang that echoed through the entire ship. Through the metal walls, they could hear the sounds of cutting tools and mechanical systems that sounded nothing like the gentle biotechnology that civilized species used. These were harsh, industrial sounds that spoke of a species that built things to last and function rather than to look beautiful. The docking bay doors began to open with a hiss of equalizing atmosphere. The airlock door hissed open, and the Kithrans pressed themselves against the far wall, expecting monsters to pour through. Instead, a figure in dark armor stepped carefully into their research bay, moving slowly and keeping both hands visible. The human was smaller than the terrifying legends had suggested. But there was something about the way he carried himself that spoke of absolute confidence and deadly capability. Lieutenant Minho removed his helmet, revealing a surprisingly young face with kind eyes that seemed completely at odds with the brutal efficiency of his equipment. His voice was gentle when he spoke, nothing like the rough growl they had heard from Captain Jiho. "Please don't be afraid. We're here to help. Are any of you injured?" The Kithrans stared in stunned silence. This wasn't what they had expected at all. Where were the savage warriors who conquered worlds for sport? Where was the bloodthirsty aggression that had gotten humans banned from civilized space? This person looked more like a concerned medical technician than a legendary death dealer. When nobody answered, Minho noticed Science Officer Thyra clutching her arm where she had injured it during the gravity storm, without waiting for permission. He approached slowly, his hands moving to medical supplies attached to his armor. "May I take a look at that? It appears to be causing you pain." Thyra flinched backward, but Minho didn't pursue her. Instead, he knelt down and began unpacking a medical kit that looked more advanced than anything in the Kithran medical bay. Equipment was compact but sophisticated, clearly designed by someone who understood emergency medicine better than most hospital specialists. "I apologize for our intimidating appearance," Minho said as he worked, his voice calm and reassuring. "We received a military distress signal, so we came prepared for combat operations. We had no idea we would be conducting a rescue mission." Instead, he looked up at the frightened aliens with genuine concern. "We should have sent a medical team first, but frankly, we haven't done many peaceful first contacts lately." When Thyra finally allowed him to examine her arm, Minho's diagnostic skills were immediately obvious. He identified the injury type, assessed the damage, and began treatment with the smooth efficiency of someone who had dealt with trauma medicine in impossible conditions. His hands moved with the steady precision of a surgeon, yet he was just a military lieutenant who had supposedly come from a primitive death world. More humans entered the research bay, and each one moved with the same casual competence that defied everything the Kithrans thought they knew about physics and biology. In the low gravity caused by their failing systems, the humans moved like they had been born in zero-G. They navigated around floating debris without even thinking about it, using tiny pushes and momentum changes that would have taken Kithran engineers years to calculate. One human medic floated effortlessly to the injured crew members trapped in the lower bay, somehow knowing exactly how to access areas that the Kithrans hadn't been able to reach for days. Another began working on their life support systems with tools that seemed impossibly advanced for a species that was supposed to be barely civilized. The most shocking thing was how they worked together without speaking, communicating through tiny gestures and glances that spoke of years operating as a perfect team. The peaceful moment of rescue was shattered when the human ship's sensors began screaming with urgent alerts. Lieutenant Minho's gentle demeanor instantly transformed as he pressed a hand to his ear, listening to communications that the Kithrans couldn't hear. His face went from concerned medic to battle-hardened warrior in seconds, and suddenly the legends about human fighters seemed much more believable. "Captain, we have a massive energy signature approaching from the outer system," came a tense voice over the comm system. The human officer's voice carried a note that made even the battle-tested crews sound worried. "Sir, you need to see this data immediately." Captain Jiho's voice crackled through the speakers, and the Kithrans could hear the change in his tone. Gone was the helpful rescue coordinator, replaced by someone who had clearly seen the worst the galaxy could offer. "Patch it through to the main display. Everyone needs to understand what we're dealing with." The research bay's emergency screen flickered to life, showing a sensor reading that made no sense to Kithran eyes. The object approaching their system was impossibly massive, larger than their homeworld's 3 moons combined. But it wasn't the size that made the humans look so grim. It was the energy patterns surrounding the thing, readings that spoke of technology far beyond what any current civilization possessed. "What you're looking at," Captain Jiho's voice continued, "is a devourer or harvester ship. Most species think they're just legends, stories told to frighten children about the monsters that used to roam the galaxy. Unfortunately, they're very real, and this gravity storm seems to have woken one up from its dormant cycle." Science Officer Thyra stared at the readings in horror. She had heard whispers of the Devourers in her archaeological studies, an ancient race that had vanished long before the current galactic civilizations had achieved spaceflight. According to the oldest records, they had built massive machines designed to strip entire star systems of resources before moving on to consume the next region of space. Lieutenant Minho was already checking his weapons and communicating with his team through hand signals that looked like a deadly dance. The casual, helpful humans from moments before had become a coordinated military unit preparing for war. Their movements were sharp and purposeful, with none of the wasted energy that other species might show when facing impossible odds. "The bad news," Captain Jiho continued, "is that thing will reach this system in approximately 4 days. It arrives, it will begin harvesting operations that will destroy every planet, moon, and asteroid in the area. The process takes about 2 days to complete, and there's nowhere in this system to hide from it." The Kithrans felt their hope crashing down around them. They had barely survived the gravity storm, and now they were facing something that could destroy entire worlds. Thyra's hand shook as she ran calculations on her personal device. Even if their ship was fully functional, they couldn't escape the system before the harvester arrived. "The worst news," the human captain added grimly, "is that the nearest galactic Council response fleet is 3 weeks away. Even if they left immediately, they'd arrive to find nothing but empty space and a harvester ship moving on to its next target." What happened next made the Kithrans question everything they thought. They knew about space travel and military technology. Through the viewports of their damaged research vessel, they watched the human fleet begin a transformation that seemed to defy the laws of physics and common sense. The ships that had appeared as brutal but conventional warships suddenly started changing shape. Hull sections that looked like simple armor plating began sliding apart to reveal weapon systems hidden beneath. What the Kithrans had assumed were cargo holds opened up to expose missile launchers the size of city blocks. The vessels grew larger and more menacing as hidden components extended outward like a predator showing its claws. Engineer Soman floated over to where the Kithrans huddled together, her magnetic boots clicking against the deck plating with each step. She seemed completely unbothered by the massive weapons being unveiled outside, as if transforming peaceful ships into planet killers was just another Tuesday for humanity. Her casual attitude was somehow more terrifying than any amount of screaming or posturing would have been. "I know this probably looks excessive to you," Salman said, adjusting something on a handheld device that controlled the ship modifications. But we learned a long time ago that the universe doesn't care about your good intentions. It only cares about your ability to handle whatever it throws at you next. The largest human vessel, which had looked like an oversized cargo hauler, was now revealing its true nature. Massive railguns emerged from concealed bays, each one capable of accelerating projectiles to significant fractions of light speed. Energy weapons that could punch through planetary shields deployed along the hull like flowers blooming in fast forward. What had seemed like a research fleet was becoming an armada, capable of sterilizing solar systems. Science Officer Thyra found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. These are supposed to be exploration ships. Why do they carry such devastating weapons? She had studied the military capabilities of dozens of species, but nothing in her databases had prepared her. For this level of hidden firepower, Salman looked at her with the patient expression of someone explaining something obvious to a child. We don't pack for the fight we want to have. We pack for the war we might need to survive. She gestured toward the sensor display showing the approaching harvester ship. Case in point. If we had come here with the kind of peaceful research, vessels that most civilizations use, we'd all be dead in 4 days. The transformation continued as smaller support craft emerged from hidden bays within the larger ships. These weren't the elegant shuttles that civilized species use for transportation. They were angular, heavily armored fighters that looked like they had been designed by someone who understood that space combat was about surviving long enough to kill the other guy first. Lieutenant Minho, who had been so gentle while treating their injuries, was now coordinating the deployment of weapons systems with the same calm efficiency he had shown as a medic. The contradiction was staggering. These humans could switch from life-saving to world-ending with the flip of a mental switch, and they seemed to consider both activities equally natural parts of their existence. The Devourer-Harvester emerged. From the edge of the solar system, like a mechanical nightmare made real, its massive bulk blotted out entire constellations as it moved, and the energy readings it generated were so intense that they interfered with sensors across half the system. This was a machine built by an ancient civilization that had mastered the art of consuming worlds, and it expected nothing more than token resistance from the tiny human fleet. The Harvester's first move was exactly what any military computer would predict. It launched a wave of hunter-killer drones, each one the size of a small frigate, designed to sweep away defending forces before the main harvesting operations began. These drones had destroyed entire planetary defense grids in the past, and there were enough of them to overwhelm any conventional fleet through sheer numbers. But the humans didn't fight like any conventional fleet. Pilot, Hannah's voice came through, the communications with the calm tone of someone discussing weekend plans rather than impossible space maneuvers. Beginning gravitational slingshot sequence. All ships prepare for high-G acceleration patterns. What she was proposing should have been suicide. She intended to use the system's largest gas giant as a catapult, whipping the human ships around. Its gravity well at speeds that would turn most crews into paste. The Kithrans watched in horror and fascination as the human ships dove toward the gas giant at velocities that made their sensors scream warnings. Any sane pilot would have pulled back long before reaching such dangerous speeds, but Hannah kept accelerating. The GI forces being generated inside those ships should have killed everyone aboard within seconds. Instead, the humans emerged from there. Gravitational slingshot maneuver, like bullets fired from the gods themselves. They were moving so fast that the Harvester's targeting systems couldn't track them properly, yet somehow they maintained perfect formation and tactical coordination. The hunter-killer drones, designed to intercept normal military vessels, found themselves trying to hit targets that were moving faster than their programming had ever anticipated. Communications Officer Taiwan's voice joined the tactical chatter, and his coordination was something beyond military science. He was tracking dozens of variables simultaneously while calculating strike patterns that turned the Harvester's enormous size from an advantage into a critical weakness. The ancient ship was so massive that it couldn't change direction quickly, which meant that once the humans established their attack vectors, their target was essentially helpless. Asteroid field deployment in 3, 2, 1, mark, Taiwan announced. Suddenly, the humans weren't just using the natural gravitational forces of the system. They were actively herding asteroids into collision courses with the harvester, turning chunks of space rock into kinetic weapons traveling at impossible velocities. The precision required was staggering. Each asteroid had to be nudged at exactly the right angle and speed to intersect with the harvester's projected path. The calculations involved were complex enough to require supercomputers. Yet Taiwan was coordinating the entire operation while simultaneously directing weapons fire and managing communications with the scattered human ships. The harvester began to realize that it was facing something completely outside its programming parameters. This wasn't the organized but predictable resistance of a typical galactic military.
Ow.
This was chaos turned into an art form. Improvisation elevated to the level of science. The battle reached its most intense phase when the harvester's defensive systems finally adapted to the human tactics and began landing serious hits on the fleet. Massive energy beams that could melt through starship hulls started finding their targets. And the Kithrans watched in horror as several human vessels took damage that should have ended the fight immediately. But the humans kept fighting. Through the communications channels, the Kithrans could hear damage reports that would have sent any civilized crew into full retreat. Hull breach on Deck 7, life support failing in sections 12 through 15, came one comm report. Gravity generators offline, artificial atmosphere at 30% and dropping, yet the ship continued its attack run without even slowing down? Lieutenant Min Ho, still aboard the Crystal Dawn, explained what they were witnessing with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing the weather. Our homeworld taught us that you don't get to choose your circumstances. You only get to choose how you respond to them. Outside, his crewmates were fighting a space battle while breathing recycled air that would poison most other species. What truly amazed the Kithrans was how the humans handled the extreme GI forces generated by their impossible maneuvers. Pilot. Hannah was pulling turns that should have liquefied her internal organs, yet her voice remained steady as she coordinated with her wingmates. The gravitational stress that would knock most beings unconscious or kill them outright seemed to barely register with the human pilots. Executing combat turn. 7G acceleration for 12 seconds, Hannah announced casually, as if she were parking a ground vehicle instead of performing maneuvers that defied biological survival. The Kithrans had to use special protective suits just to handle the mild acceleration of normal spaceflight. These humans were operating at G-forces that would turn a Kithran into liquid. Engineer's summoned ship had taken a direct hit from the harvester's main weapon, and half her systems were offline. Instead of retreating to safety, she was running calculations for weapons targeting while working in a ship where the temperature had dropped below freezing and the air recyclers were pumping out smoke instead of oxygen. Her fingers were probably numb from the cold, but her targeting solutions remained perfectly accurate. Systems are running at 15% efficiency, she reported cheerfully. As if massive system failures were just another engineering challenge to solve, compensating with manual overrides and some creative rewiring. Give me 2 minutes, and I'll have the main guns back online. Communications Officer Taiwan was coordinating the entire battle while dealing with equipment failures that would have left other species completely deaf and blind in space. His communication array had been partially destroyed, forcing him to jury-rig connections using backup systems never designed for combat operations. Yet somehow he maintained perfect tactical awareness and continued directing the complex attack, patterns that were slowly wearing down the ancient harvester. The most shocking thing was how the humans treated these extreme conditions as completely normal. They weren't pushing themselves beyond their limits in some heroic last stand. This was just how they operated when things got difficult. What other species would consider catastrophic emergencies, requiring immediate evacuation. Humans called interesting operational parameters. The Kithrans began to understand why humans had been exiled from civilized space. It wasn't because they were violent monsters. It was because they made survival itself look easy. The ancient harvester ship died with surprisingly little fanfare. After hours of impossible combat maneuvers and tactical brilliance that defied everything the Kithrans thought they knew about warfare. The massive vessel simply stopped moving. Its energy readings dropped to zero, its weapons fell silent, and the mechanical nightmare that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia became nothing more than an expensive piece of space debris. Captain Jiho's voice came through the communications. With the same calm professionalism he had shown from the beginning, threat neutralized. All human vessels report minimal casualties and acceptable damage levels. Preparing to escort our new friends back to civilized space, he said it like they had just completed a routine training exercise instead of destroying a weapon that could have consumed entire star systems. Research leader Kixa floated in the restored artificial gravity of her repaired ship, staring out at the human fleet as they prepared for departure. The vessels were already transforming back into their peaceful configurations, hiding their devastating weapons behind innocent-looking hull plating. In a few minutes, they would look like ordinary exploration ships again, giving no hint of the incredible firepower they carried or the warriors who crewed them. Lieutenant Minho finished his final medical check on the Kithran crew, ensuring that everyone was healthy enough for the journey home. His gentle bedside manner had returned now that the crisis was over, but Kixa could see something different in his eyes. There was a depth there that spoke of experiences no civilized being should have to endure, yet he carried them with quiet. "Grace, I have to ask," Kixa said softly. "Why were your people really exiled from our part of the galaxy? The official records say you were too dangerous to be trusted. But after what I've seen today, that explanation doesn't make sense anymore." Minho paused in his packing, considering his words carefully. The galaxy made a choice a long time ago. They decided that peace was more important than strength, that comfort was more valuable than capability. When they met us, we reminded them of everything they had chosen to give up. We represented the possibility that they might have to face hard choices again. Through the viewport, Kixa could see engineer Soman coordinating the final repairs too. The Kithran ship with the same methodical competence she had shown while fighting for their lives. There was no arrogance in her work, no sense of superiority over the less capable Kithrans. She simply did what needed to be done, the way her people always seemed to do. "Your species evolved on garden worlds under protective governments," Minho continued. "He created beautiful civilizations where everyone was safe and comfortable. But comfort makes you fragile. When something like that harvester appears, you don't have the tools to deal with it because you've never needed them before." Captain Jiho's final message interrupted their conversation. "Crystal Dawn, this is the Human Defense Fleet. We're honored to have met you, and we hope this encounter helps build understanding between our peoples. Remember us kindly, and perhaps someday the galaxy will be ready to face the darkness together." The human ships vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind only sensor ghosts and a profound silence. Kixa realized that her people would return home with more than just stories of rescue. They carried proof that strength and gentleness could coexist, that the galaxy's greatest protectors might be the ones they feared most.